Playing at Business with Steve Reese, the business podcast with a sense of fun. To find out more, go to playingatbusiness.com.
Hello, and welcome to episode 25 of the Playing at Business podcast. I'm the host, Steve Reese, and today we're going to be talking about India's fast-growing toy manufacturing sector. Now, our company's been working with Indian toy factories since 2014. It's been quite a journey, and we'll be sharing some of the things we've learned along this journey during this podcast episode. But before we get onto that, if you'd like to find more news, analysis, and general insights on the toy and game business, please feel free to check out www.toyindustryjournal.com, which is all about the toy business, www.boardgamebiz.com, which is all about the board game business, you can sign up for our free email newsletter on either of those sites. We send out emails most Fridays update on our latest content. If you find anything that we do interesting, please share it with people, because the more of an audience we have, the more of this stuff we can put out there. We do offer consultancy services to toy and games companies, so if you want to find out more about what we do, check out www.kidsbrandinsight.com/services. And also, just to be fully transparent before we go ahead with this podcast, we do run a venture which you can find out more on at www.toyteamindia.com, which helps toy companies find cost savings and compliant toy factories out of India. So we do have a particular, vested interest in the topic of today's podcast. But my style is always to be as transparent as the situation allows. So yeah, we'll try and give you kind of a the pros and the cons of India as a toy manufacturing hub. To date, we played some kind of role in introducing 5 out of 10 of the world's biggest toy companies to India for toy manufacturing. We've learned a lot along the way, and we're going to share some of that with you in this podcast episode. Okay, so there's a lot of chat about India as a toy manufacturing hub right now in the toy business, and there's some reasons for that. Firstly, major toy companies like Hasbro, Mattel, and Spin Master all have local sourcing offices in India. Last year, at some point in 2020, at the time we're recording, it's 2021, both Hasbro and Spin Master announced that they were planning to have at least 50% of their toy manufacturing outside of China. Although that may have slowed down a little bit, that shift due to the pandemic, which is a massive shift versus where we were a few years back. And India is one of the major beneficiaries of that, but you can check that out in their statements to the stock market. And I guess one of the things I want to do in this podcast is explain what's good and what we'll have to develop over time in India. It's still relatively a new thing. If you think it took decades to get China to where it is as a toy manufacturing hub now, India has a long way to go in that sense. It's not necessarily the perfect solution today, but it is one of the primary solutions that we're heading towards. So I guess the question is, why would these major toy companies embrace a kind of a yet to be fully developed manufacturing hub? Now, there are some reasons why big companies have to do this in advance of smaller companies, and basically it comes down to capacity. So if you're a company spending $10 million on manufacturing, you could probably move that tomorrow. It's an exaggeration, but you can move it quickly. If you're spending like $1 billion or $1.5 billion on toy manufacturing, that's a lot of capacity you need to ensure that you have available to help you hit your sales goals. So if there are any shifts happening, you need to be ahead of those shifts, because if suddenly you have to do something, it's a lot harder to try and move that volume of production than it is to move a fraction of that. So to go back to that question, why then would major toy companies embrace this yet to be fully developed manufacturing hub? It's for those reasons. It's all about supply chain risk. If you can't make it, you can't sell it. That's the bottom line. And really the answer to why that becomes a challenge or an issue lies within China. So, China's been an awesome manufacturing solution for the toy business. When I first entered the toy business in the late 90s, it was already, easily the primary hub, efficient. Okay, not perfect in every single way, but just reliable. At least traditionally, maybe a bit less so recent years, but traditionally low cost, efficient, deeply knowledgeable about the toy industry, and like a deep supply chain for toys. I always say that if you need to find something in China, some kind of supply chain component or part or some extra thing or a different type of toy, you can probably find it within a short kind of ride around. And that's all those things combined together to make China just this massively fantastic, habitual kind of supply source to the toy industry. Some things have changed though, and that's really what we're going to look at, and why inevitably that road then leads us on to India. So I guess some things that have changed. There's obviously some issues in what you might call the geopolitical situation. I'm not going to dwell on any of that. Politics is not the purpose of this podcast. But obviously, there's some frictions and tariffs relating to USA and China. I guess on a more positive note, though, you have to accept that China has been ridiculously successful in transitioning from a poverty-stricken agrarian economy to an increasingly affluent, advanced industrialized society with cutting-edge technology and with increasing disposable income and wages for Chinese people. And I mean, if you read anything about the sort of the comparatively recent history of China, you hear stories about in the scope of the lifetime of someone of my age, in my 40s, Shenzhen being a small fishing village. I mean, it is literally crazy, the rapid advancement of the Chinese economy. And I think in many ways we should celebrate this and also be happy for the people who've been manufacturing our toys for decades, that their economy is moving kind of onwards and upwards, making, I guess, more complicated products and allowing them to earn more money from doing that. And I guess overall, the issue with toys, generally speaking, is labour costs. And whereas factories in China, they were kind of so well known for whenever there was a problem, they chuck more people at kind of a manufacturing problem. The reality is that rising labour costs, whilst it's a good thing for the labour, is a challenge for the toy industry because price points are so key in the toy industry, and the kind of resulting labour shortages has meant that amongst these things that like really labour intensive toy manufacturing, needing like human hands on a production line. Frankly speaking, it's becoming less and less viable over time, and the move is more towards higher end manufacturing. Cars, computer technology, just everything that's a step up from toys, which generally are regarded as kind of the low end of manufacturing, really. That's not to say that China is going to be leaving the toy business. Like, our analysis and predictions are absolutely the opposite. They're going to keep production on some kind of recurring, perennial product lines where production can be automated for maximum efficiency. They're going to keep a lot of that, but also they're going to keep production for China's fast-growing domestic toy market, because why would you send it anywhere else? It doesn't make sense. And I guess on that point, if you haven't listened to our podcast episode with Jacqueline Bong of Playology International, you should do if you're interested in China's fast-growing domestic toy market, because Jacqueline's an expert in that, and that was a really interesting interview. But anyway, back to manufacturing, which is the point of today's podcast. The reality is that more than 2/3 of toy products normally are new each year. I mean, it's crazy the amount of churn that we have. So it basically means, as an industry though, it makes far less sense to invest in production automation on products which might not be here next year. There's a lot of investment and cost in setting up, robots, other forms of kind of automation and technology enhanced production. It just doesn't make sense in the toy industry sometimes. It's primarily going to remain a high labour production sector, at least for the next decade or so. Maybe the technology will move on so far that, just the flexibility of the technology and the robots available will allow them to do some of the things that you can do now, but not currently, and certainly not in the next decade or so, we would estimate. So, I mean, above all else, what you need is capacity. If you can't manufacture it, you can't sell it, as I said before. So when you start to look at alternatives to China's vast labour pool, of course, there's only one country on planet Earth with a comparable population, which is India, with, depending on which figures you read, around a 1.4 billion people population. The other thing about the Indian population, though, is it's also heavily urban. and that means there's cheap, abundant labour, um, kind of at very affordable prices within the cities themselves. So one of the things that's caused some problems with the kind of way of doing things in China over time is the dorm culture and the kind of implicit link between that and extra overtime and all the things that cause compliance and audit fails. You don't really get those issues in India because there's so much population locally. Um, it just doesn't really seem to happen at this stage. You also get the massive kind of latent industrial capacity, especially for automotive manufacturing. So India makes millions of cars each year. In fact, I think it's tens of millions actually. And the major components in on the inside of cars obviously are injection molded or blow molded plastics, maybe some foams and things, all of which are obviously kind of core parts of toy manufacturing. So it does make sense because of the labour and the kind of existing knowledge, domain knowledge for plastics, that India should be an obvious choice for a toy manufacturing hub. Um, you know, Generally we're seeing cost savings of around 5 to 10%. It depends entirely on the type of product, the complexity, how many components, whether the local supply chain can supply everything. The moment you have to start shipping things in from China, maybe some of that cost advantage is eroded, but that is realistic. And that's a fair chunk of money. If you say a toy company spending, say, turning over 100 million US dollars for easy math or maths, so they might be spending 30 million on manufacturing. Say, if you save 10% of that, that's $3 million. I mean, that is an absolute uh, gold mine just waiting to happen. I guess there are some limitations on what you can get in India for toy manufacturing right now, which I'm always very upfront about. You can get injection and blow molded plastic toys, absolutely. Although the tendency is for factories to want high volumes, just based on the fact that the big companies have kind of perhaps sullied the water a bit in terms of the expectations of factories for volumes on individual toy products. But definitely, plastic is kind of where it's at for sure. Basic plush is really good. Cardboard games and puzzles. There are some other categories as well. Like I said earlier, the supply chain depth is not quite there, so quite often people ask us for things that we just can't find from a source that we would say is reliable, or if not reliable, at least cost effective, or kind of compliant or likely to be compliant enough for us to recommend them. There are around, my estimates are maybe just over a dozen export level plastic toy factories used by the major kind of corporate toy companies already. There's many more coming through though. I'd say every day we get an inquiry from a different plastic manufacturer in India wanting to enter the toy business and asking for our help. I think that shows to a degree the scale of the potential and kind of ongoing transition here. Obviously, it's not just plastic, like I said, though. This part of the world is very well known for textiles and has been for a long time, which kind of links into plush toy supply as it's primarily fabrics. We've seen that basic plush tends to offer a cost saving versus China. Although we found so far that feature plush, like anything with electronics, kind of tends to need components to ship in from China, which will slow things down and oftentimes erode the cost benefit, just make things too complicated, because there are some tariffs for importing from China into India, which were introduced recently. So, but basic plush is, like I say, is really good quality, good workmanship, good consistency, good factories, good working conditions, and good pricing. So yeah, that's a positive for sure. I think the electronic side of toy supply chain in India is advancing. They are making kind of smartphones and these kind of things in some areas of India, but it hasn't really filtered through to the toy business, the toy manufacturing business, quite to the degree we would like. But it is coming for sure. On the games and puzzle side, we've seen some awesome production facilities. There are some major iconic kind of household names games being produced in India in huge quantities, and there's definitely a significant cost saving available on cardboard. So that's another thing. Also, just in terms of retailers, like major retailers like Walmart, Target, Carrefour, all those kind of people, they're already getting toys shipped from India to them from the likes of Hasbro, Spin Master, and others, and have been for a few years now. So they really shouldn't be surprised at this stage to find that you're wanting to supply them from India. There are some challenges, and I promise to be as transparent as I could be. It's not as mature as a manufacturing hub, which means the supply chain doesn't have the depth. Like I said, it is developing. Probably one thing you would notice more is working practices are really different. Communication sometimes slow and kind of non-committal in terms of when things can be done by. It does sometimes make the process seem a little bit like herding cats, if you've come across that expression. And in the end, it kind of leads to customer service therefore not being quite as sharp, efficient, and quickly responsive as it is in China right now. So that's an area of obvious need for improvement. But also like some of the minutiae of customer service, like if you've got a retailer who needs specific labeling or master carton markings or formats or anything, like the factories in India haven't always been recognizing how critical that is as part of a process, which means that basically the bottom line is it does take a bit more work to manage efficient supply relationships with an Indian factory versus a Chinese one today. Like I say, though, that situation is kind of changing all the time, and the reality is for those people, maybe the next generation on from myself who were there in China in the early days, I'm absolutely certain there was a big learning curve. It's just that right now we've been at the end of that learning curve, with China, and fortunately, like I mentioned, those big corporate toy companies are kind of well, to use a pretty strange term, I guess, battering the factories into submission in terms of some of these areas. So it is an area that's improving, but some people have had problems in that regard. But the bottom line is like toy production isn't shifting to India because everybody decided we wanted to go to India. It's kind of shifting there because it has to. Things were so efficient and cozy with China, but because China itself has changed and continues to change, and because also, I guess, fundamentally, low pricing is such a key part of the toy business, and that's not going to be routinely available in China going forward in the same way as it perhaps has been. So we are going to have to find some alternative sources, whether we like it or not. So we need to learn to manage these differences. And India's toy factories, they need some help and some guidance, and kind of strong management. But I think the will is there. So things are kind of improving in that regard. I also wanted to share, yes, rather than this being like a really dry, corporate sourcing podcast, I wanted to share a few memories of and kind of experiences I've had myself of India, and just what an amazing country it is to visit. Aside from whether you're going to be sourcing from there or not, it's I would describe it as chaotic and vibrant, and there's both kind of good and bad from both of those. I guess that's my experience. There's people everywhere. There's so many people in the cities in India. I'm going to shame myself. I'm not going to name this city, but basically, I visited a place I'd never even heard of before that had 6 million people living in it, and I was like, wow. I mean, I literally had never even heard of this place. Some place that seems like a small town on the map might have 2 million people living there. I mean, in the UK, which is our home market, that's a major city. So I guess the good thing is, from the toy business perspective, that's a really good sign for labour supply for sure. Overall, I'd describe India as a country of vast contrasts. So you can stay in the most opulent hotels, like Indian hotels, are the top end hotels are amazing, really, really genuinely amazing. But outside might be like the kind of thing you might expect from watching YouTube videos or whatever. Cattle wandering around in the road, or stray dogs wandering around, or maybe people living in kind of little shacks or shanties by the side of the road, and even sometimes on the pavement. Genuinely, the first time I visited India, kind of as a country, it blew my mind. So I was just seeing things I hadn't seen anywhere else. What was funny was I arrived in the middle of the night, and everything was really quiet. I was like, oh, it's not quite what I'd expected. And then the next day, it was like bang, a massive humanity and beeping traffic and everything else. So yeah, it's certainly an experience. The other thing though on that first trip, which I remember, was on my way to the toy factory I was visiting, passing a massive Mercedes-Benz car factory. Now, bear in mind, half of India's cars that they manufacture in the country are exported. Mercedes-Benz obviously generally renowned for basically the highest of standards, and this plant from afar looked pristine and huge. But then also I went into the toy factory, and it was so clean and so orderly. I literally would have eaten my dinner off the factory floor, and there aren't that many factories I've visited that I would say that of. So yeah, I always say that there's often chaos outside, but the good toy factories that we work with in India, they're like an oasis of calm and structure inside. So yes, and then I guess the other two experiences, completely not really connected to manufacturing, but two things I would feel remiss not to mention is, one, the people are so warm and friendly, so creative, so intelligent, so kind of entrepreneurial. It's such a stimulating place to visit just because of the people you meet. And normally, outside of COVID times, maybe we'd be in India every 2 months, and the trip there will leave me buzzing afterwards for weeks, literally. It's just that kind of experience. Secondly, the food. I'm not going to dwell on this one, but if you like Indian food, it really doesn't disappoint. Amazing experience with food. So anyway, back to the the business stuff. Normally I find in helping customers find new toy suppliers in India, the easy bit is to run some quotes and then to haggle your way through to some attractive looking pricing. Okay, sometimes it isn't cheaper and sometimes it is, but you get to that quite easily. The hardest part of all is to kind of get our clients to take the time and commit the time, and also I guess spend the money on travel to visit the factory in India, obviously outside of COVID times. But when people do, when they do travel, they're generally amazed by what they see. By this kind of the capability and the environment in the factories, and just obviously India as a place itself. At this stage, 7 years after we first showed a customer around a factory in India, we've got 100% conversion rate. Literally, that is every single customer who visited has eventually ordered something from India in the factory, and maybe that's because at that point, to commit travel budget, means you're effectively already just rubber stamping something. I don't know, but it has to be seen to be believed, I would say. So I guess the bottom line then on why India's toy manufacturing sector is growing so quickly. We've long since stopped having to get people to consider, should you look at some alternative sources to China. When we first started, that was 100% of the conversation every time. But now I think toy companies are aware at the very least it's something they should be looking at, and it's definitely accelerated with all the kind of tariff issues between the US and China. The reality is India is going to be a big part of the toy business going forward. Like it or not, embrace it or not, it is going to be a big part of the toy business. There's going to be challenging times all around because managing change, educating and kind of upskilling new vendors is likely to be stressful and difficult. That's the bottom line. But the reality is, I guess in the same way as embracing a new diet and exercise regime will leave you kind of fitter, faster, leaner, stronger afterwards. I think the toy business will end up stronger in the end for having a much more diversified supply chain, quite frankly. So yeah, that's pretty much it for this episode of the podcast. I could probably talk for hours on India, but it's not the scope of this podcast. If you're interested, feel free to drop us a line somehow. I'll just share again the places you can find us online. So yeah, again, the blog websites on the toy industry is www.toyindustryjournal.com. The board game is www.boardgamebiz.com. Frankly speaking, we write a little bit less content on Board Game Biz because it's quite narrow. Toy industry is everything in toys, so it's much broader, but we do put some specialist stuff up on boardgamebiz.com as regularly as we can. The podcast, obviously, if you like this or any other episodes, please share them. There's definitely more episodes coming soon. If you'd like to find out more about our general consultancy service, we've delivered for more than 100 companies around the world. Please visit www.kidsbrandinsight.com/services. Specifically on India, if you do want to find out more, you can check out a little bit more information about our venture there www.toyteamindia.com, or just drop us a line via any of these websites. And that's pretty much it for now. So I've been your host, Steve Reese. This has been Playing at Business Podcast, and we'll see you next time.
Playing at Business with Steve Reese, the business podcast with a sense of fun. To find out more, go to playingatbusiness.com.